Welcome to the program Event on Jack TV. My name is Fumilayo Okorafor. After a successful coronation ceremony of the 9th Eze Aro of AFRICARIBBEAN Kingdom, His Eminence Dr. EBERECHUKWU, the 9th Eze Aro of Aro Kingdom, the people of Aro, both in Nigeria and diaspora, Corporate Council on Africa, and the AFRICARIBBEAN Diaspora Alliance jointly invited His Royal Majesty to Washington, D.C., USA, to address issues around energy transitions on the margin of the World Bank and International Monetary Fund for. Indeed, the first-class monarch was live in Washington, D.C., where he met with experts, where he had a discussion with experts, where he discussed on this particular topic. Of course, brought out some possible solutions. This is what we are bringing your way today on the program Event on Jack TV. Our phone numbers are there on your screen today. Give us a call ahead of that beautiful event, and I tell you, we'll be there with our cinematographers professionally trained to ensure we give you nothing but a classic coverage. Straight on to Washington, D.C., where the first-class king met with international experts to discuss on issues. Take a view. Following the installation of Eze Aro, His Eminence Dr. EBERECHUKWU as the 9th Eze Aro, which was a historic event in the history of Arochukwu and Nigeria at large. In an event that brought together men of high repute, traditional rulers, clergies, politicians, top government officials, business tycoons, and the great people of Aro in Nigeria and diaspora. The Corporate Council on Africa (CCA) and the African Caribbean Diaspora Alliance jointly invited Eze Aro, His Eminence Engineer Dr. EBERECHUKWU, to feature on the high-level panel of experts to address issues around energy transition held on the margins of the World Bank International Monetary Fund fall meetings in Washington, D.C., USA. The President and CEO of the Corporate Council of Africa, Florizele B. Lisa, respectfully requested Eze EBERECHUKWU to participate in the Powering Africa, Financing Gas-Powered Solutions, Foiling Sustainable Growth Forum.
His Excellency Mohamed Ould Khaled, Minister of Energy and Oil of the Islamic Republic of Mauritania, His Eminence EBERECHUKWU, Chair and CEO of Eastwise Hub Ventures, Mr. Wale Shonibare, Director of Energy Solutions at the African Development Bank, distinguished government representatives, distinguished panelists, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for attending this afternoon's insightful discussion on Powering Africa, Financing Gas-Powered Solutions to Fuel Sustainable Growth. I am Leila Njai, Chair of the AFRICARIBBEAN Diaspora Alliance, co-founder of the Alliance, and also President and CEO of LND Golden Network, an advisory firm based here in Washington, D.C. The AFRICARIBBEAN Diaspora Alliance was launched last June in Nassau on the margins of the Afrexim Bank's General Assemblies, and the Alliance is committed to fostering a robust and interconnected regional partnership that promotes trade, investment, and mutual prosperity among Africa, the Caribbean, and the United States of America. Ladies and gentlemen, today's forum is the result of the strong partnership between the AFRICARIBBEAN Diaspora Alliance and the Corporate Council on Africa.
Eze EBERECHUKWU, in his capacity as the Chair, CEO of Eastwise Ventures Limited, joined the high-level panel and specifically spoke on the topic LNG investment, local projects with global impacts. The Arochukwu first-class monarch and expert in energy matters joined other distinguished speakers, including the Senior Vice President, African Development Bank Group, Marine Laure, Akin Olugbade, and the Minister of Energy and Oil, Islamic Republic of Mauritania, H.E. Mohamed O. called to address these sensitive issues.
Increasing percentage of local content required for most projects. And that program in itself has been hugely successful. not because those targets were set. They were successful because of the commensurate local capacity that was built with it. Because at the early stages, what we found is that you can set whatever target you like. If there is no local capacity, then you will quickly start writing exceptions to the rule, and that doesn't make sense. So you have to, at pace with whatever target you set, invest in local capacity, and we have to do that across the board, from technicians, unskilled labor, to local service providers, to encouraging certain level of local partnerships, encouraging local and international partnership. I mean, it's quite a detailed law. My advice is, if anybody is looking at that, do spend some time to look at the Nigerian local content journey, because it's been a journey. Some things were done that just didn't help in interest of balance reportage. But overall, when you look at it, it helped tremendously, helped Nigeria build capacity. And what we found is that in recent years, with the international oil companies exiting Nigeria, we then have local Nigerian companies that could step in. There are not many places where that is the case, but that is the case. The company I was running, ND Western, as some of you may know, we did the deal to buy Shell onshore asset, and that's a $2.4 billion deal. But we could do that because over the years we have built capacity to be able to step into the shoes of Shell when they are exiting the country. So if you really want to drive local content that works, what you need to think about is local capacity, and you have to build that capacity from ground up.
Thank you. Honorable Minister, any last word?
I think the one challenge that we face in Africa with big projects is that there is no project that can be financed by one bank. It's always a syndicated group of banks, and the majority of banks right now don't finance projects that are has to do with hydrocarbon. So that's an issue. But I think this is definitely an opportunity for private money, private equity, private investors to invest in infrastructure in Africa, power, roads, grids, whatever. So I think that's definitely an opportunity that the private sector in the West and in Asia can look at in Africa because of this challenge. So this is definitely a big challenge for us in Mauritania with the power project, for example. Financing is a headache. So.
Thank you very much. Can you generally pick up from where you left off, explaining really from the perspective of African businessmen like yourself who want to be in the energy sector, what are really the risks and rewards, what are the pitfalls, and what do you need to be aware of?
So thank you very much. Purely from a private sector businessman point of view, is you have to do two things. One is that you have to position yourself in the place where you can make profit, of course, but also where you will get the most support to succeed. And by that I mean, if you look at the state of play, you have upstream, requires huge amount of capital. You have midstream, also requires sizable capital, and then you have downstream, where you can basically enter. So what's happened for many private sector big players in Nigeria today is that they started in the downstream, trading petroleum products, those sort of things. You build capacity, you build credibility, and then you move up the chain.
Do you think many African countries have legislation in place to facilitate, for instance, at least downstream activities? By way of
many African countries do. They have yeah, there are issues, of course, but they do. Generally speaking, of course, a lot is left to the industry capacity of the local businessmen to be able to work and navigate, whatever local policies and challenges that they have. We still have some countries where the government is still playing outsized role in across the board. and those policies need to change to enable private sector participation. But to the earlier topic I was speaking to, which is really about financing, because it doesn't really matter whether you're playing in the downstream or the midstream or the upstream, you still need money. And the subject of industrialization, you cannot leave it to just the government and the big institutions. You have to democratize industrialization. And by that I mean you have to enable very many people to participate and lower the barrier of entry. While the government and the big players will build the backbone infrastructure that enables the small players to participate. So I'll take gas, for instance, in our country, when investment was made to build the ELPS, the Lagos pipeline system, we saw industrialization in Lagos, in Abara, in Ota, in Sagamu. These places were able to industrialize simply because we made gas available. Learning from that lesson, what we are saying now is other parts of Nigeria need such infrastructure investment. To build the pipeline, we have the AKK pipeline, which are taken to the north. Eastwise Hub Venture, which we put together, is to build the same kind of backbone pipeline infrastructure in the east of Nigeria, where we already have pockets of industrialization, but everybody is running on HFO or diesel and expensive fuel. You need to get pipeline gas to this individual, to these companies and to these pockets of industrial center. In fact, our vision is that an infrastructure company like Eastwise Hall should facilitate building pipeline infrastructure to the city gates of our 36 states in Nigeria. And what that does is that everywhere you get pipeline gas, people quickly convert from diesel to gas. And then what you see is a knock-on effect in that local economy. People do cooking gas, people run their factories, small factories, SMEs, everybody runs on gas and on diesel. Even if the national grid collapses or have issues, people are able to power gas turbines and infrastructure. So this is really, really key. But to form such projects, you then need partners who are able to bridge the conversation between big financial institutions, local banks, and the guys on the ground who make it happen. So we conceived this Africa Energy Fund, and the whole story about the Africa Energy Fund is to be able to tell that story with credibility. To basically say we're local businessmen, we are on the ground, we know the people who run those projects, we come together to forge the kind of partnerships that is necessary to be able to conceive the projects right. We have the IPPG, which is the indigenous energy companies who come together to say, these are the projects that the government will not do. We have to do them because they are critical for industrialization. And on the back of that, we take gas to these centers where we conceive industrial parks, working together with regional governments to say, if you bring gas to this industrial park, then the park will actually take off. Then government have to provide the tax incentive and all of that, maybe things like road network, etc. Land administration, you know how land is in Africa, very traditional, to make sure that people get the land they need to build the factories to create the jobs. So what I'm saying is that from a private sector point of view, if we are able to attract financing to build big infrastructure backbone pipelines, to bring gas to the regional center in a country like Nigeria, which is what we're trying to do, then industrialization will happen on the back of the gas that you have. Otherwise, what you have is today Nigeria with over 200 TCF of gas, and people are still cooking with firewood. That just doesn't make sense. So we really have to crack the code of industrialization, which in my view is, get the gas to the people wherever they are and then they need them. Have the conversation like we're having today to make sure that people understand that they're dealing with the most credible people that they have. So if you put your money behind infrastructure that will orchestrate, the project will be delivered on time and will tick all the boxes to ensure that these projects are actually economic and that they will pay back.
Obviously, but do you have the impression in international fora that people hear you and they agree and the same way?
Sometimes I get the impression that our conversations are being dominated by the concerns of others. rather than focusing on our own concerns. So that's what we mustn't lose sight of. Even in terms of the terminology, energy transition is great, but if you don't have it, what's the transition?
Thank you. Honorable Minister, any concluding remark or question that you would like to address?
80% of people of the population that doesn't have energy in the world are in Africa. 80%, 80, yes.
That's very sobering.
Understood.
His Eminence.
Yeah, so,
concluding remark?
so my concluding remarks, I will summarize them as follows. Number one is we should continue to fund and finance gas as a transition fuel. I don't think we can say that enough. And I really appeal to everyone who's listening to us today to become a big advocate, for that. We just haven't said that enough, and maybe our voices are not being heard. We're local businessmen, we're credible businessmen, and we want the world to know that we need to fund gas. So much is riding on it, and we just can't afford to fail.
Thank you. Do you have a question?
There's a tilt towards more electricity generation, and we have historically known that if there is no purchasing power, the access issue will not be resolved. And the access issue gets resolved, the purchasing power issue gets resolved by creating the jobs and the income necessary. If you look at the countries that have really grown recently based on gas, they have really developed, they have industrialized, as you were saying, and we have many examples. So unless the government gets a very strong industrialization policy that would be driven by the big project like the mining, iron ore, going to steel export, or even agriculture. Look at Brazil now, they are basically transitioning all of the agricultural equipment into gas. The transport sector, those do hold a lot in terms of enabling us to do a transition that is sustainable, that will create the jobs. And we don't hear enough of that.
Thank you. Maybe take one or more, two questions. Yes. Quickly, and so because we are running out of time.
My name is Jude. I've been in sustainable finance for more than 5 years. I've assessed issuers framework in terms of issuing green bonds. My question is to Mr. Boazi. How comes the African Development Bank is not pushing for transition bond? It is expected that by 2034, transition finance will hit approximately close to trillions of dollars. That's a huge market that Africa is not tapping. Japan is doing it, issuing transition bond. I don't know why most African countries are not doing it.
Thank you. One last question. Yes.
My name is Binta Mamadou. I'm from Niger, and I'm a project finance attorney. As we all know, and the panelists, His Eminence touched on it a bit, we know how important it is for there to be local content in various international transactions, especially when you have foreign investors coming into any African country. And I'm generally of the view that African countries don't always push enough to ensure that there are adequate local content requirements when negotiating an agreement. I'd love to hear from you about what you think, what type of reforms you think countries, governments can actually put in place to ensure that when these deals are being negotiated, that there is an incentive or a requirement to ensure a level of local content requirement.
Thank you.
Thanks. First of all, there was a talk about sustainability. I think when we talk about sustainability, we also have to talk about sustainable finance, right? Because in a lot of these projects, we go and borrow hard currency for 15, 20 years, and you find that in many countries it's not sustainable. You have, the currency devaluation, and people cannot afford the cost of electricity, and you can't pass it on. So, and it relies on what we're saying, relates to what we're saying about local content. In some countries where we can create new instruments to crowd in local pension funds into financing infrastructure, we're already doing that in some countries where, for instance, to create the first local currency fund that could finance infrastructure long-term, even longer than the commercial banks. We were involved in that in Nigeria and also in other countries. So I think we need to focus on that a little bit more, because some of this financing that we put in place may not be sustainable. You're asking for government guarantees, and governments can no longer provide many of those guarantees. When you talk about transition financing, for instance, we have the Africa Energy Transition Catalyst Program, which you may not be aware of, which is also helping countries with their energy transition projects. We are actually supporting Mauritania, looking at putting in place the right kind of policies for green hydrogen, where we have embedded people within the government to support that effort. We also have the African Legal Support Facility, because what you find is many African countries go and enter into agreements that are not balanced, because your foreign investor brings in the top, you know about it, DLA and all of these top-class lawyers, and maybe there isn't sufficient capacity locally. So we need to create a more level playing field so that our countries are not signing deals that are hugely disadvantageous, or that another government will come and cancel because they don't feel that the country has.
Regarding gas, we are sitting on about 60 to 80 TCF between GTA, Grand Tortue Ahmeyim and Birala. And so you were asking about GTA project that we share with our brothers in Senegal. The project will go into production by beginning of next year, hopefully. So we are almost done with the construction. We are now in a commissioning phase. And regarding our part of the gas, so each country will get about 35 million scf per day, and this we will be able to generate maybe something like 230 megawatts in a combined cycle. And we are launching an IPP for power station in Jago, in the south of the country, and it's going to be shortly in the next couple of weeks, and we will use that gas for gas to power. So this is the first phase of GTA. GTA has several phases, at least 3, and so now we will be producing 2.5 million tons per year, and the goal or the plan is to move to 10 million tons per year in the third phase. So we are now discussing with our partners about the next phase, which will double the production to 5 million tons per year. Regarding the project itself, the IPP, so we plan to have an FID by end of next year. So we'll give the company that will build the plant and operate the plant about a year to do the studies, and we'll go FID end of 25, and then we want to have the first kilowatt by end of 27. So that's the plan. And the project is an integrated project. It's like the power plant, the transmission line, the pipeline from the GTA hub to the power station. So it's an integrated project. Yeah. So and we're getting a lot of interest from big companies. So we think that although the plan is a little aggressive, but we think we can do that.
Well, Honorable Minister, obviously, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is that you're going to use the gas to create electricity, which you mentioned. Are there other priorities in terms of the use of that gas? I mean, after you've done, do you have other sector? Do you have a priorities that you want to address first in Mauritania? Is it going to be for industrial use? Is it for commercial? I mean, for the city of Nouakchott, or
the electricity?
Yeah.
No, the electricity will be just connected to the grid. So in Mauritania, we don't have yet universal coverage. So we are at 57% electricity penetration rate. So the urban areas are at 90-something%, but the rural areas lack electricity. We are at 10%. So we still lack a lot of electricity. So we think that the 230 megawatt will be just injected in the grid and will be available to the public, industry, everything. So it's not, we don't prioritize.
Okay, but that will be in the first phase.
Yes.
But going forward in the next 2, 3, 4 years, where hopefully you will have also 100% coverage, what do you think about like setting up industrial regulation like steel or other type of?
Yes. So we are. There are different vectors that we are talking about right now with our partners. One of them is domestic gas. The second thing is direct reduction. As you know, we are a big iron ore exporter, and we are looking into doing steel in Mauritania with direct reduction with gas. Actually, a study of a pipeline from the hub to Snim in the north to Majibu was done. So we are looking at that for the second phase and for Birala as well, for the other field. So that's definitely the future of gas in Mauritania will have something to do with mining.
Pleased to welcome all of you to today's session of our annual Africa Finance Forum, which we do every year on the sidelines of the World Bank IMF meetings. Today's session will focus on financing gas-powered solutions to fuel sustainable growth. I want to thank our co-organizers and sponsors. First of all, my sister Layla and Di from the AFRICARIBBEAN Business Network and Alliance. We did an event similar to this during the UN General Assembly a month ago, and we're pleased to be continuing that discussion. The challenge for this year's fall meetings is how to navigate this new normal and attract the new investment and financial partnerships that will be necessary to create the jobs and growth Africa needs, while also managing the increasingly significant impacts of climate change. Another way to put all this is that today's session on financing gas-powered solutions to fuel sustainable growth will be a very important part of the global agenda this week, as well as over the next several years. We are privileged to hear from so many important stakeholders today, contributing to powering Africa from a policy, financing, and corporate standpoint. This forum, as I said, follows up on the one that we did with Layla and Di and the AFRICARIBBEAN Diaspora Alliance last month. And this will also be something that we will continue in 2025, including in Luanda, Angola, which will host the 18th CCA US-Africa Business Summit in June. Please stay tuned for more details coming very soon. I'm now delighted to invite the chair of the Alliance, my sister, Layla and Di, who is the president and CEO of L&D Global Network, to make her welcoming remarks. Layla, over to you, my dear.
Ladies and gentlemen, today's forum is the result of the strong partnership between the AFRICARIBBEAN Diaspora Alliance and the Corporate Council on Africa. We are deeply grateful to CCA for their invaluable collaboration. We also extend our sincerest gratitude to our sponsors, Chevron, TNA, Piper, ENGR, represented here by its CEO, Mr. Sébastien Elebo from Côte d'Ivoire, and Eastwise Hub Ventures, represented here by its chair and CEO, His Eminence EBERECHUKWU from Nigeria. Your support has been instrumental in making this event a success. As you may know, Africa has been a significant player in the global energy landscape, with 40% of the world's new natural gas field discovered in the past decade. This substantial reserve, over 5,000 billion cubic meters, positions Africa as a key player in the future energy supplies. the potential of natural gas infrastructure to facilitate electricity access in regions with acute energy shortages is a beacon of hope. This is crucial as around 600 million people in Africa lack consistent electricity access. The transition from more polluting fuels to natural gas is a game changer for Africa, offering a promising future as it can play a pivotal role in decarbonizing its energy sector.
The forum focused on the multiplier effects of leveraging Africa's natural gas resources as well as the investment opportunities and challenges in this dynamic sector. CCA is a premium business organization focused exclusively on promoting greater US-African business partnership and engagements. Member company represents a diverse pool of industries active in Africa's most promising sectors including agribusiness, energy, finance, health, ICT, infrastructure and security. The African Caribbean Diaspora Alliance on its own is dedicated to build an economically vibrant and interconnected regional partnership that promotes trades, investment and shared prosperity between Africa and the Caribbean and the diaspora.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to CCA for organizing this conversation. I think at the African Development Bank, we have a wide spectrum of opinion on this issue. As you know, the bank has 81 member countries. All 54 African countries are shareholders of the bank. And then we have the non-regional members, you know, the OECD countries, Asia, US. And across the board, whenever this issue comes up, it always generates a lot of heated conversation. But our view is that gas is a very important...
When you say our view, you're talking about the management of the bank versus the board?
Okay. Yeah, so it's actually my responsibility to revise the energy policy of the bank. And that has to go through...
That's very pleasant because I have a lot of questions about that.
Yeah. That obviously needs to be approved by the board when the policy is ready. There's a lot of conversation right now, undoubtedly. And African countries obviously want to use their natural endowment. Africa is very energy deficient. There's a recognition that, you know, if there's a certain amount of carbon wallet available for the world to spend before we get to, you know, 1.5 degree, that Africa has not spent its fair share because that's been largely taken up by the developed world. But having said that, I think there are also practical reasons why gas represents a transition for Africa. Because if you take the electricity, for instance, no country has industrialized on the back of intermittent renewable energy. And where we are right now is that you're going to require batteries to allow you to get, you know, baseload power out of renewables, and the batteries are not cheap enough yet, although the costs are declining rapidly. So you do need baseload, and many African countries are using gas as that baseload. What happens when the sun doesn't shine, when the wind doesn't blow? You still need to provide electricity, and if you don't have that, you're going to cause a lot of grid instability. We finance the largest wind park in Kenya, Lake Turkana. But in some instances, Kenya suffered grid collapses because of not having sufficient reserve to be able to step in when the wind is not blowing. So in other countries, you have good regional interconnections and you can have electricity trade across borders. But in Africa, we're not there yet. So if you don't have the regional interconnections, for instance, in the UK, when the wind stops blowing, they can buy nuclear from France. You know, so these gas plants are dispatchable. You can ramp them up and down very quickly, and so they're an essential part of what you need to stabilize the grid. All the African countries are signatory to the Paris Agreement, and they have actually outlined their trajectory to net zero under their nationally determined contributions. So the developed world obviously want to achieve net zero much earlier because they have to. They're polluting more by 2050, most of them. But the developing world, under the Paris Agreement, are actually allowed to peak later. Like China is saying 2060. Our African countries probably won't get there till the end of the century.
Why haven't African already set up a date? I mean, if everybody has said 30, 50, 60.
Some African countries have set dates. I think Nigeria is targeting 2060, if I recall correctly. But the fact of the matter is that first they need to industrialize. Our problem, big issue in Africa, is actually energy access. Energy transition is important.
I think you've done very well by explaining why Africa needs it. My question is, how are you going to go get there? I mean, you said that there is a tension and division. You are in charge of preparing the new policy because there is an existing one. Correct me if I'm wrong. The only energy that is excluded was nuclear, and I wasn't even sure about coal. That is it still the case?
Yeah. Well, recently we've come out and said where the bank is no longer financing coal.
You know,
yeah. Having said that, though.
Okay. Nuclear as well.
Nuclear, we're not.
Okay.
At this point.
Do you have any concern that for the rest, everything will be accepted?
I think for every gas project that we want to finance, we have to demonstrate why it's required. First, if there are no viable alternatives, one thing we're also...
You just explained that there's no viable...
No, in some countries there are viable alternatives. And for instance, like Kenya is probably, 95% renewables. They have geothermal, they have hydro, they have wind. In some countries, they don't have, particularly West Africa, I think there's a significant amount of reliance on gas. Obviously, because of the climate crisis, hydro is not as dependable as it used to be. We know what's happening in Zambia and Zimbabwe. So we have to look at the situation on a case-by-case basis. And in some countries, they're flaring a significant amount of gas. That's even worse. In Nigeria, Algeria, they're flying a lot of gas. So if you can capture the gas and then use it to generate power, then, clean cooking is a massive agenda for Africa. There are 900 million Africans without access.
By the national guy, and you've been involved in oil and gas. So what's your experience? What are the pitfalls? How did you manage to survive in this area where it is dominated by the giants?
Right, thank you for that question. So interestingly, for a country like Nigeria, most of the private sector executives, most cases come from the big companies. I worked 22 years for Shell in my 30 years in the oil and gas sector, so the last 10 in the private sector. Now there are challenges, but also there are opportunities. And the challenges are well spoken to by both my co-panel members in terms of when the big companies come, how then do you provide opportunity for local content? How do you accelerate local participation in the industry? And those challenges will mean that the countries that are new to oil and gas in a big way will have to build capacity very quickly. And it does make sense if a lot of nationals join the big company and then come to private sector, then they come with all the right corporate governance, like he was speaking to. They come with the right level of knowledge and experience to participate effectively in the oil and gas. There's of course a challenge that indigenous companies struggle to get financing for their projects. So,
why do you think they get part of the financing?
So first is we talked about governance. Some of the companies when they are set up, they are not set up with the right level of governance. So if there is a key man risk in their company where one person is overly influential in the company, it makes it difficult for folks to trust you with their money. So it's important that the companies are set up properly. And by setting up properly, that the right governance is in place. You've got the right mix of shareholders with the right level of experience to be able to superintend over the business. And then the projects that you propose should be globally bankable projects. And when I say projects are globally bankable, it means that in the mix of your project plan, that you have, just like you were asking the Honorable Minister, your short term, what are you going to do immediately? So you're probably heavy fossil fuel dependent. What are you then going to do in the medium to the long term? You have to show a pace with your country's promise to net zero, that in future your company is going to transition from heavy fossil fuel dependency to renewable energy, as the case may be. So when you develop this project, they really have to be bankable. And as my co-panelist was explaining, you have to have in the promoter group of your project people that have global name recognition and credibility, so that people can trust them, potential financials can trust them, that in both the managing of the project and how the company is being run, that things will be done properly.
But probably not to the level where you will be the only African and everybody else from Italy and Norway. And so if you talk about local content, it must be an African company.
Correct.
So, but also, I mean, there are institutional ATV who provide technical assistance to help you in your governance, in other type of, and even in the form of grants. So, have they been generous or very complicated? I mean, why is it difficult?
So, ATV has been very good because they are local. So they provide a lot of bridge between local financing and global financing. So that does work. And when we say local content, I mean, if you take a company like the company I was running in the Western, I think in the board we have we have maybe like 80 to 90% Nigerians in the board. Management is even way higher than that. But it does help that you are growing capacity across the board. Capacity in governance at the board level, capacity in executive management, capacity in running the company day to day. And such capacity, Nigeria will be fortunate. The oil and gas industry has been there for 50 years plus. So there is enormous capacity, it's global capacity. So sometimes when we say indigenous for Nigeria, really, the talent in Nigeria are global talent. Yeah, if you understand what I mean. So, but it's important that new African countries that are coming into oil and gas, that they think about what it will look like 10 years time, what it will look like 20 years time, and start now to build that capacity. Centers where we typically, in the past, we send young engineers to go train them here in the US and in Europe, most of those centers are closed for the same reasons that we're talking about. So Africa has to find a way to grow its own timber to be able to run all the projects that we're talking about. So that's really, really important. So I think what I'm speaking to specifically, as far as the conversation on gas as a transition fuel, it creates opportunity for local companies who understand the global conversation to position themselves to provide what the global community is looking for in terms of credibility, in terms of capacity, in terms of competence, excellence in delivery, to speak to the issue, to say, energy transition is happening. However, energy poverty has to be solved now. And we need the resources, particularly gas resources in Africa, to solve that energy problem. Like my ADP colleagues say, if you have 1 billion people, close to 1 billion people, who do not have access to clean cooking energy sources, it's not something you just wave with broad brush policy. If you get to the nitty-gritty of it, that's a lot of people that needs energy now. And global finance cannot be withdrawn from gas when we have such a problem. So we're happy to have the conversation. We solve today's problem and then position ourselves to address tomorrow's problem. And the way you address tomorrow's problem is all the efficiencies you build in the industrialization of Africa.
Welcome back to the studios of JET TV. That was, of course, His Royal Majesty, His Eminence, Dr. EBERECHUKWU, live in Washington, D.C., USA, where he met and sat with international and foreign experts discussing issues around energy. You could see how he profiled certain solutions. You could see the display of intellect. It is one thing to be a king, to rule people, and it's another thing to be academically sound. And that's what we just saw right here on the platform. On this note, we want to say a big congratulations to all our sons and daughters. We are all proud of you. We know you are indeed proud of your new king. Thank you so much for the discourse. Thank you so much for taking your time to watch this program. We all know you are proud of your new king. On this note, I want to say very big congratulations to every one of you once again. That's what we're drawing a curtain on today's broadcast. Please don't forget, our numbers are still there on your screen. Give us a call today ahead of that event of yours, be it in Lagos, be it in Abuja, wherever. Just give us a call. We'll be there with our cinematographers professionally trained to ensure a classic coverage of your event. Until our next broadcast, I remain sincerely yours, Fumilayo Okorafor. Thanks for watching.